The jury in the Mike Madigan corruption trial says it is deadlocked on some of the charges.
Let's get started now with Charlie Wojciechowski. He's live at the Dirksen Federal Building with the very latest for us. Charlie, what can you tell us?
Well, Marion, it seems we have a partial verdict. This is not a hung jury. This is not a deadlocked jury, except on a series of counts. The jury passed off a note to the judge this morning, the 30th note they've had so far. And in that, they said, we have come to a unanimous decision on 17 counts, and we have tried our best to come to a unanimous decision on the remaining 12 counts, and we have not been able to do so. That means there are convictions here on a number of counts. We don't know which ones those are. There are 12 remaining counts, but remember, this is a case involving both Mike Madigan and his confidant, Mike McClain, so those 12 counts could very well be shared by each of the two defendants. What does this mean? Well, typically when jurors can't reach a decision, the judge will tell them, go back and keep thinking about it. But in this case, because they have been so firm in saying they have a partial verdict, the judge will likely offer this up to both the defense and the prosecution. He will say, what do you want to do now? The defense in this case has already indicated we'll take the verdicts on the 12 counts. The Justice Department is hammering that out right now upstairs in the 12th floor courtroom. It is likely in this case that if it goes through today, which it probably will, the verdicts on the 17 counts will stand. The government will not retry those counts. Instead, according to Ron Safer, who's a former U.S. attorney and now an attorney in private practice, we talked to him just a couple of minutes ago, he says the government will take that too, because when it comes time for sentencing, they can argue on those counts. They can build that into what they're asking the jury for in terms of a sentence. This is a complex case, one that is unfolding. There are 23 basic counts, but some of those counts are shared by both defendants. When we learn more about exactly which of the bribery, extortion, wire fraud counts the jury did make its decisions on, we will let you know. But right now, the bottom line is the jury has reached a verdict on 17 of the counts. On other 12 counts, they are unanimous in the fact that they cannot reach a decision on. We will find out what those are in the coming moments. Betting men will say that the jury verdict in the counts that they can find a verdict on will stand, and then the other counts will be addressed at sentencing. That is what we know right now from the Federal Building lobby. Back to you.
Charlie, thank you. An important point to emphasize as well. The 17 decisions that they have made, we do not know if they are guilty or not guilty, just that they have reached a unanimous decision on those 17. Charlie, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Let's check in now with our investigative reporter, new to us recently, Chuck Gowdy. So glad to have you in the family. Great timing. Tell us a little bit more about what your thoughts are about the split, first of all, and the way, based on your years of experience and watching court and trials, this sort of thing can go.
Well, to play off what Charlie said about a gambling man or woman might well say this split verdict is going to be guilty on the counts that they've been able to reach a decision, and they're hung on a collection of charges that may, for instance, we don't know, but for instance, may relate to the undercover work of former Alderman Danny Solis. They didn't believe Solis, so they couldn't reach a verdict on all of those. They could reach a verdict, and seasoned defense attorneys say what they've seen in the past is that in this exact scenario, it would be guilty on the counts they have been able to reach a verdict on.
All right. What do you think the impact may be? I mean, who knows? We're all speculating at this point. But Mike Madigan was a big surprise when he testified. What did that say to you?
Well, if in fact this does come back as a number of people have told me they think it will, it would mean that they didn't believe Madigan. But then again, you know, this is very dangerous territory here during this period of time when the jury's reached a decision, hasn't announced it. It could also go the other way. Mm-hmm. You just don't know. You kind of play the likelihoods of the way things have appeared in the past. But it would mean that they didn't believe Madigan when he testified and took the stand.
And the last few minutes, what we've seen since this jury note at 10:10 this morning, it's a measure of risk by both parties of attorneys, because it was a negotiation on all parties to say, how do we all want to move forward collectively with the judge's approval, of course.
Right. The government seems intent on taking the partial verdict here. It's 2/3 of the charges against both men combined. The government must feel good about the way that this has played out. believe me, they will declare a major victory even with a partial verdict if it goes in their favor. And it will be that.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
We'll keep
Stick
an eye on
around because we know something's going to happen
anywhere.
today. All right. Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Chuck. Welcome back. We want to get right back to the Madigan verdict. We are starting to learn some of the charges right now. Do you want to run through a couple of these, Alex, and then we'll try to get to Charlie right away?
The first one, it appears, which is racketeering conspiracy with Madigan. They have not reached a verdict on that, so that is left blank. The second count, conspiracy against Michael Madigan, guilty on that count.
And we have a not guilty on 2 as well. Count 4 on Madigan, which was bribery, guilty. Count 5, travel act, which is guilty for Madigan. Count 6, bribery, guilty for Madigan.
Correct.
That's what we have right now. 7, Madigan guilty, which is the travel act. Count 8, Madigan guilty, wire fraud. 9, guilty, wire fraud. 10, guilty, wire fraud. Those all related to former Alderman Danny Solis, who did testify in trial. And as you remember, he wore a wire for the federal government, so he was a major witness.
Here's the next is count 11, bribery, not guilty for Mike Madigan on that 11th count.
That's a Solis.
One of the Solis, but then 12 is guilty on the travel act on count 12 for Mike Madigan. So far, 2 not guilty, 1 left, and now another guilty on count number 13, another violation of the Travel Act.
That involves Solis as well.
Lines, correct. 14, Madigan guilty, another count of the Travel Act, another Solis count. As these are all just coming in directly from the jury in real time, we appreciate you staying with us here. 15, attempted extortion, not guilty for Mike Madigan, related to the alleged scheme to get the developer of the Union West luxury apartment building. So that's a not guilty. 16, not guilty for Mike Madigan. That's another count of the Travel Act. There are 23 for Mike Madigan. We're going
Let's
through
get
here.
right now to Charlie Wojciechowski, who's in the Dirksen Federal Building. He's also getting this information from our court watcher as these different counts come in. Charlie, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing in reaction even now where you are.
Well, the fact that we're seeing guilty verdicts on bribery and extortion counts is really incredible in this case. These are the big, heavy charges. These are the ones that will draw the most in terms of a federal penalty, and the fact that we have guilty on some of the bribery counts does not bode well for Madigan. The fact that you're seeing not guilties in some of these cases means the jury just didn't have enough information to make a decision on, especially with that Union West project. A lot of the allegations were that he used his influence to steer business to his law firm. Well, his law firm testified that there was a very developed process to screen cases, so there was no conflict of interest in those cases. It seems as if the jury is understanding bribery to mean not necessarily bribery that benefited Madigan personally, but benefited his circle of friends and his confidants. That is important. What is also important in this case is something that Mr. Safer brought up earlier. When sentencing time comes around, it doesn't so much matter that you are found guilty on all counts, but he can argue, or the prosecutor, Amrit Bachu in this case, can argue that we found him guilty of bribery. We found him guilty of extortion. We found him guilty on these wire fraud charges. And in their totality, they can warrant a very serious sentence in this case. It also means the jury did not pay attention to the recent Supreme Court decisions, or I shouldn't say not pay attention, didn't give as much weight to the recent Supreme Court decisions which demanded a quid pro quo to define bribery. This came out of the Indiana case, if you remember. So the fact that there's no direct benefit to Madigan didn't matter so much. These gifts, these items of value from AT&T, from ComEd, and from others were construed as being as a benefit to the former speaker, and that's why you're seeing these verdicts in this case. I think that the blank verdicts you see here is just we didn't have enough information to make a decision. It shows the jury was really paying attention, really wanted to do a good job, did not want to overstep their mandate from the court. But the fact that you've got guilty verdicts on very serious charges, not very good for Mr. Madigan.
As you've been talking, as it turns out, they could not come to a decision on any of the McClain charges. They have all been called blank, which is what we believe to be a deadlock. Your thoughts on that? So all of the cases against McClain, which included bribery involving the Chinatown parcel, which mostly some of the Chinatown cases, as well as the racketeering case. What are your thoughts on that?
The fact that McClain had no political power and could not convey direct benefits on any particular party, I think weighs into that. McClain was a lobbyist, and a very good lobbyist by all accounts, one that took his job very seriously. All he could do was try to influence the speaker in these cases. He could bring these various job opportunities, these various investment opportunities to the speaker's attention, but in the end, Mike McClain made no decisions whether or not to pass on the carrier of last resort legislation for AT&T, made no decision as to whether to agree to a smart grid for ComEd. And for that reason, I think his activity is mitigated by the fact that he had nothing to provide. He may have provided these opportunities to the speaker, may have advised him to either take them or not take them, but in the end, Mike McClain had no power. All the power in this case resided with the Speaker's office and with Mike Madigan.
Charlie, any punishment that McClain would have received, it's a good point to note. He is already convicted on the previous ComEd trial on 9 felony counts in the ComEd 4 case. So he's already looking at a possible sentence at 77 years old of a very difficult sentence there. We want to give you the raw numbers now that they're all collected here. Mike Madigan guilty on 11 of the 23 counts against him. Not guilty 6 of those 23, and the jury could not reach a verdict on the other 6. And you mentioned the McClain charges, blank for all of those.
Let's bring Chuck Gowdy back in here on this, what you've heard so far.
Well, it's interesting what Charlie said, the differentiation between Madigan and McClain. Mike Madigan was obviously a longtime elected public official. He's the one who was operating, or should have been anyway, at a higher bar. The conviction against him can only be considered devastating to he and his attorneys. The government is going to, it's not a slam dunk. Obviously, there are some counts that they couldn't even get a verdict on, a couple of not guilties. But the government will certainly frame this when they come out to talk about it as a major victory. I mean, you know, there's been a room for Mike Madigan in the Illinois Corruption Hall of Fame, or shame, as some might call it, for decades. He's been under investigation for various things. Today, this jury unlocked the door for him.
What's the difference maker? As you mentioned, you're right. He has been under scrutiny. He's been criticized. I mean, he had a feud with many of our former governors, including Bruce Rauner, who was always gunning for him.
Right.
What do you think in this particular case? What was it that worked in this case? Was it Solis? Was it just having him on tape?
Well, it may have been, because the jury did convict on a couple of the Solis counts. The former alderman who wore a wire was operating as a covert member of the FBI. It was thought possibly that the jury wasn't going to believe Solis, and that all of those counts would be either not guilty or would be the ones they couldn't reach a verdict on for some reason. That's not the case. So they did believe Solis to some degree. It's clear, though, they didn't believe Madigan. Madigan's testimony didn't help him get off the hook here because he's convicted of racketeering, of fraud. The racketeering conspiracy count number 1, carries a 20-year penalty with it. He was, you know, not convicted on that.
He was. Yeah, there was a deadlock.
He was convicted of count 2 conspiracy. Oh, these are very serious felonies. Michael Madigan is a convicted felon now, and he's going to pay a stiff price for this.
As you guys were both hinting, what we are witnessing today is an affirmation by 12 of Michael Madigan's peers. The suspicions of millions of people in Illinois and many officials in Illinois of what had been going on for a long time. And this is nothing short, even though they didn't get all of the counts that they wanted and guilty for the federal prosecutors, this is nothing short of a gigantic victory and a sweep on several cases in a row now between AT&T, ComEd, the deferred payments that had to be made and given back, Burke, they're cleaning up corruption
Right.
in a way that citizens had been looking for.
Does
for
that
decades.
work? I mean, and that's one of the questions I would have for you as someone who's been here, because we have seen this is not the first rodeo on a convicted government official. I mean, almost every governor had been convicted before, and it was always the big name. Does it mean that politics changes in the state of Illinois?
Yeah, no. I mean, convictions have not been a good deterrent in the state of Illinois or the city of Chicago. In fact, the stats that I reported out a year ago, in the last 50 years, there's been an average of 1 public corruption conviction per week.
Wow.
In the state of Illinois for 50 years. That's how many cases have gone to trial and have ended in conviction.
And Madigan,
Mike Madigan's the latest.
And he survived 3 governors who went to jail before he ultimately now sees this conviction as well.
One of whom was pardoned this week, I might.
Yes, yes,
true.
that is true.
Down to 2.
That's another story.
That's true. But
Yeah.
I also think another challenge for prosecutors that they were able to overcome. Mike Madigan did not have a cell phone, famously. He did not do email, famously. He tried to go through, and here's a look at how it all ended up here for Mike McClain and Michael Madigan. He famously used the code, our friend, as Mike McClain would often say. Our friend would like this and that. Well, jurors didn't buy that it was some mythical figure. They thought they knew exactly what was going on some of these counts.
Have people gotten more sophisticated, maybe, as we've gone through the years? And it was clear, too, that the government, as you mentioned, they throw a lot at these cases. They're going after a lot of, there's 3 or 4 different instances. You had the Union West, you had the AT&T, you had the ComEd situation. So you're throwing a lot of different cases.
Right.
Is that what you think is effective in this case, or are jurors just more sophisticated about that?
Well, I think it may be a little of all of those things. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that there were convictions here. The U.S. Attorney's Office is across the country. They win 95% of their cases. They bring cases they can win. If they didn't think they were going to win this case against Mike Madigan, they wouldn't have brought it in the first place. We would be talking about a much bigger story if he had been acquitted of everything.
Certainly.
The fact that he was convicted is not surprising, considering the way the U.S. Attorney's Office operates.
Go ahead.
Do you have a sense? I'm going back to your history of knowledge of just this city and its politics and the comings and goings. Do you think he thought? I mean, the fact that he took the stand, I thought maybe he thinks he's going to get past this. Do you think he thought he would?
Even though Mike Madigan frequently came across as kind of meek and mild-mannered, quiet speaking in public, the no cell phone, no computer thing kind of played into that image that he didn't need all of the modern, goodies of life and of politics. I think behind the scenes it was a different game, and I think Madigan taking the stand was proof of that he thought he could talk his way out of it, schmooze his way out of it. That's the game in Springfield, where people aren't necessarily paying as much attention. Those 12 jurors and the alternates were paying very close attention to what Madigan had to say and how he said it. It's not an episode of The Sopranos. You can't talk your way out of these things once you get to federal court.
Mm-hmm.
The Velvet Hammer.
You might be able to. You might be. Yeah. You might.
That's his nickname.
Right. Yeah. The Velvet Hammer. Well, today they nailed him.
Yeah.
They nailed him, all right. All right, so what do you see happening as it relates to, I don't even know what the maximum sentences are, the guidelines are.
He's going to be 83 in April.
Right.
Yeah, he's getting, how do you see that playing out? I mean, does the government just go for bore like they have in the past?
Well, they certainly will go for whatever the appropriate highest sentence is. Madigan's likely to come back and claim age.
No priors.
We'll see a list of all of his illnesses. They will try to say, he's an elderly man. Let him live out his years under probation, home confinement, whatever. The government is unlikely to go for that. No proof that that's been the approach they've taken recently.
Not so far. That is true.
You remember former Speaker of the House Dennis Hastert said, "I'm sick. This is a death sentence for me." Well, he got out of prison after a year, and it wasn't a death sentence. Mike Madigan is likely to argue the same thing.
We shall see.
Chuck, thank you.
Gowdy, stay with us. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Now we want to get back to that breaking news, a partial verdict in the Mike Madigan trial.
Yeah, we've been seeing those counts come in. 10 guilty, 7 not guilty, and 6 counts for Mike Madigan that the jury could not reach a decision on. Again, the first indication we had that something might be happening today was just after 10 o'clock when the jury sent in a note saying, we're not sure about all of these charges, but we are sure about some of them.
And we want to point out Mike McClain, who, although guilty in the ComEd 4 trial, was found deadlocked. The jury was deadlocked on all 6 of the counts against him. Let's check in now with Charlie Wojciechowski live at the Dirksen Federal Building with the latest from there. Charlie, are you hearing about anybody, the defense or the prosecution, or even some of the jurors potentially coming down to talk?
We expect the jury to come down. They've been told to come to the lobby if they want to make a comment to the media. I was just speaking to Bernard Haberle a couple of minutes ago. He was in the courtroom. He got a chance to observe Mike Madigan, and in his words, Madigan was stoic as he received the verdict. He looked down a number of times. Rose Schmidt, who is our political producer, tells me that Madigan was taken from the courtroom, escorted to one of the small jury rooms across from the courtroom, and there he is meeting with U.S. Marshals. I don't know exactly what is going on in that room, but chances are they're developing a strategy to bring him safely out of the building, perhaps past all of our cameras. This is a monumentous day in Illinois politics, and perhaps the one verdict that means more than anything is the very first count. Let's take a look at what we prepared in terms of a graphic here. Count 1 in this case is racketeering conspiracy. It did face both Madigan and McClain, and it's an overarching charge alleging that they created a political essentially a crime enterprise running in the Speaker's office that allowed them to manipulate companies to achieve political goals and get jobs for their friends. That is a very large count. He was found guilty on that one. Madigan found guilty of criminal conspiracy as well. That's helping ComEd pass important legislation in return for hiring associates as do-nothing consultants. We get not guilty verdicts on count 3, that is bribery with the ComEd board and Juan Ochoa. We get a guilty, though, when it comes to hiring former Alderman Zalewski and then funneling payments from ComEd to him. What we're expecting to happen now is kind of the spin that comes after a trial like this one, hearing both from the U.S. Attorney's Office and from the attorneys for Mr. McClain and Mr. Madigan. Both will try to claim victory in this case, but of course federal prosecutors coming away with the biggest victory of all. They got a conviction on Speaker Mike Madigan. Now this comes in an atmosphere, I think Chuck Gotti referred to it earlier, where the prosecution of public officials for public corruption has become less of a priority in the Department of Justice. We just saw what happened in New York with Mayor Adams up there. We've seen just yesterday the pardon given to former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. So the fact that they were able to achieve a guilty verdict on so many of these counts is a major accomplishment for the U.S. Attorney's Office. We expect them here in just a few moments to tell us what they see and how they interpret this verdict from the jury.
Charlie, that is a really good point. And now that we are in the Trump administration, where he too is a convicted felon and has already famously said going after public officials is an abuse of power by the prosecutor's office. Do you think that played in any way at all in this case, in this new administration, just maybe even the way that the jury looked at it?
Well, the jury has been told to avoid all sorts of media. Stop watching TV, don't go on social media, don't read the newspaper. So if they're following their instructions, they are not necessarily attuned to what is going on in Washington with regard to the Justice Department and the Trump administration. But I think the fact that there's been a clear message sent through the Justice Department to stop prosecutions, get rid of inspectors general, to at least halt the process, if not change it. The prosecutors here are well aware of that, and we're seeing some people come down right now. This is Mike Madigan and his attorneys. Mike Madigan, you see, wearing the cap. He is holding the hands of members of his family. That is Tom Breen, the man with the silver hair behind him. They have left the courtroom, left the courthouse. Mike Madigan, the former House Speaker here in Illinois, the longest running House Speaker in the history of the country, convicted on at least 17 counts, a major accomplishment for the government, a major defeat for Madigan. Of course, we do expect to see all of these verdicts challenged in court on a number of grounds, but for right now and as it stands, Mike Madigan left this building a convicted felon after having been one of the most powerful people in the state of Illinois.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Thank you, Charlie. Chuck, we can't overstate. Again, I mean, Burke was one of the most powerful people in the city of Chicago. Madigan, honestly, was more powerful than the governor.
Head of the Democratic Party in Illinois.
Head of the Democratic Party, longest-running House Speaker in the country, and very often had more power than the governors who were above him. What does this mean? I mean, as far as what he meant to the state, can you put that into some context for us?
Well, he actually held a position. He certainly had these by name that you talked about, but his actual power and influence went way beyond anybody in the state of Illinois. The mayor of Chicago, the governor of the state, previous House speakers, anybody else. Madigan managed to consolidate a power base that spread from the north to the south of Illinois, and he had pipelines to Washington, D.C. So he knew how to play the game, and he played it with impunity for decades. Today, the story changed. It also shouldn't surprise anybody that Madigan didn't speak on his way out. I mean, Madigan didn't speak on his way out when he was in politics and had a reason to talk.
Right.
Today, he has no reason to talk. It's a dark day for him.
Famous for not doing interviews. I want to also talk about, Charlie touched on what the jury had to think about and what the jury's mindset has been. We got to remind people, this trial started October 21st of last year. So that's a really long time. A lot has happened between October 21st and now. And then on top of that, 11 days of deliberating.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yeah, we had a whole election that happened. And and again, let's remind you of those counts, because 10 convictions is significant. And the big one, if you had to say, would be the conspiracy conviction. You're right. I think anybody, both you and Charlie made the point, Chuck, this is what they're going to be hanging their hat on. You have these very high-ranking charges, no matter what, convicted felon, and the government will be cheering and parading after this one.
10 of 23 is not half, but they will clearly take 10 out of 23 for
that's the top one there. Conspiracy. It would be known in the U.S. Attorney's Office as bribery conspiracy. If you're an elected official or former elected official anywhere, that's not a crime you want to be convicted of. Mm-hmm. It's bigger than a Burger King fraud deal like Burke went away for. This is big time bribery conspiracy that Mike Madigan has been convicted of.
And the bribery may have been the most questionable after the changes at the U.S. Supreme Court, saying what actually constitutes an exchange.
The quid pro quo.
But they got him on several of those bribery counts, which were thought to be the most difficult for prosecutors. Really interesting.
So that means the jury saw a quid pro quo.
And you would have to think that when the jury went back to the jury room, started deliberating, that was the first thing they looked at. And once they decided that, all of the other ones either did or did not fall into place, depending on how they saw the evidence.
And here's the not guilty counts we want to show you. 7 not guilty, the ones that prosecutors were not able to convince the jury on lawfully accepting the property, interference with commerce, and also the biggest charge, I think, at the very top, it was count 1, which is racketeering, that he was running a racket at the top of this centralized scheme.
Yeah, let's take a look on your screen there. We're going to talk about the ones they did deadlock on. Racketeering is the one they were not able to come to a conclusion on. And interestingly, they were such a polite jury. We're really not doing well on these other 12 counts. Can we move along? And that was accepted by both the Department of Justice and by the defense, which is an interesting take. But that was the choice that they made.
And they certainly, the defense may have to thought at some point in time, 11 days of deliberation, some sort of deadlock on the charges. They had to think that some of this was going in their favor over time, as opposed to getting a very quick decision.
They were pretty quick to say, we'll go along with it. And you're right, they could have said no, all or nothing, and they did not make that choice.
And in this political climate, I don't think the government really wanted to roll the dice on whether or not the Department of Justice in Washington, under the Trump administration, would say, we're not going to go after this guy for anything else. Drop it. Right. If there had been acquittals across the board, or if they couldn't reach a verdict.
Right. Okay. We're going to obviously have a lot to talk about in the coming newscasts. We'll have a wrap up of everything that you've seen today coming up beginning on our news at 4 o'clock. We'll see you then.